Before we dive in, I've got a quick question for you. Where are you watching from right now and what time is it? Drop it in the comments. It's always wild seeing how far these stories travel. Now, imagine this. Trevor Philips suddenly steps into the Elden Ring universe. What happens next? Let's find out. Trevor doesn't arrive in the lands between the way a Tarnished is supposed to. There is no noble fall from grace, no whispered prophecy, no sense that the world has been waiting for him. He comes to consciousness the same way he does everywhere else in his life. Violently, confused, already angry. Cold stone beneath his hands. A sky that looks wrong, stretched and bruised with gold. Wind carrying a smell he doesn't recognize. Ash, rot, something old and dead that never stopped breathing. He isn't chosen. He isn't guided. He's dropped here, like a problem no one bothered to solve. Grace flickers nearby, uncertain. It does not glow with reverence the way it does for other Tarnished. It trembles, like it's reconsidering its own decision. Trevor notices it, squints at it, and does what he always does when something strange demands reverence from him. He mocks it. No prayers, no kneeling. Just a tired laugh and a muttered insult as he pushes himself to his feet. Whatever gods rule this place, they've already failed the first test. They let him in. The lands between respond poorly to this. Creatures that should lunge hesitate instead. Hollow soldiers lift rusted blades and falter, as if unsure what script they're supposed to follow. Trevor doesn't fight with ceremony or curiosity. He fights like a man who has spent his entire life proving that fear is optional. Every swing is excessive. Every kill is messy. And when it's over, he doesn't look triumphant, just annoyed that it took so long. He doesn't ask where he is. He doesn't ask why he's here. That's the most unsettling part. Other Tarnished cling to questions because questions give them hope. Trevor has burned that instinct out of himself. He moves forward because standing still has never saved him. Churches loom in the distance, broken and forgotten, and for a brief moment something stirs behind his eyes. Recognition, not faith, familiarity. He's seen places like this before. Buildings built around promises that didn't survive contact with reality. When he encounters the first whisper of guidance, a spectral suggestion of purpose, a half-formed idea of becoming something greater, Trevor reacts the only way he knows how. He rejects it outright, not with defiance, but with contempt. He has spent his life being told who he is, what he's for, and how his story should end. The lands between are just another voice in a long line of liars. And yet, despite everything, the world does not push him out. It watches. It waits. As if the Erd tree itself senses that this man is not a hero, not a savior, not even a conqueror, but a flaw, a living contradiction, a Tarnished who shouldn't exist, and does anyway. Trevor keeps moving, not because the path is clear, but because the silence behind him feels heavier than the danger ahead. The lands between stretch outward in all directions, vast and indifferent, as if daring him to find a reason to care. Golden leaves drift through the air, brushing his shoulders like they expect a reaction. He ignores them. Beauty has never impressed him. He's learned that the prettiest things usually hide the sharpest edges. The first sight of grace he fully registers sits at the edge of a broken road, its light pooling softly against the dirt. Trevor circles at once, wary, like an animal that knows traps come dressed as gifts. When he finally steps into its glow, there's no revelation, no warmth, just a low, uncomfortable awareness. The sense that something is looking back at him, measuring him in ways he refuses to understand. If grace is meant to soothe the Tarnished, it fails here. All it does is remind Trevor that even in death, this world expects obedience. He learns quickly that death works differently here. When he falls, dragged down by a blade he underestimated, crushed by something far larger than it should be, he wakes again, breath tearing back into his lungs like it's angry to be there. No lessons, no humility, just irritation. Resurrection doesn't make him careful. It makes him reckless. If the world won't let him stay dead, then it doesn't get the luxury of restraint. As he wanders deeper, fragments of history cling to the land like scabs that never healed. Ruined camps, burned-out villages, bodies posed in quiet surrender. Trevor doesn't mourn them, but he recognizes the pattern. This isn't a kingdom that fell in a single moment. It rotted. It cracked under the weight of its own rules, its own gods, its own idea of order. That recognition settles in him, slow and heavy. For the first time since arriving, he isn't just surviving, he's paying attention. The enemies grow stranger, knights still pretending they serve something meaningful, creatures twisted by curses they didn't choose. None of them speak, but Trevor understands them anyway. They're still fighting for a system that forgot them. He doesn't hate them for it. He hates the lie that keeps them standing. When he cuts them down, there's no satisfaction, just the dull certainty that this world is built on the same foundation as his own. Power dressed up as purpose. Somewhere along the road, an unspoken truth begins to form. The lands between don't know what to do with him. He doesn't fit into their cycle of reverence and regret. He doesn't fear their gods, and he doesn't crave their crowns. And that uncertainty, that inability to define him, starts to ripple outward. The world doesn't bend to Trevor Philips. It unsettles itself around him. That ripple follows him as the land grows more hostile, as if the world itself is slowly losing patience. Storms gather without warning. Creatures emerge from places that feel too deliberate to be coincidence. Trevor notices it, not consciously, but instinctively. The same way he's always known when a room is about to turn violent. The lands between are reacting to him, testing boundaries, pushing back in small, spiteful ways. Not because he's strong, but because he's wrong. At a distance, the Erd tree dominates the horizon, impossibly radiant, its golden light cutting through clouds like a promise that refuses to expire. Most Tarnished look at it and feel direction. Trevor looks at it and feels accused. It reminds him of every authority figure who ever claimed they were building something better right before everything burned. He doesn't march toward it. He drifts sideways, skirting its influence, choosing broken roads and forgotten paths instead. Not rebellion, avoidance. He's never trusted anything that wanted him too badly. When he finally encounters others like him, wandering Tarnished, clinging to scraps of purpose, the interactions are brief and uneasy. They sense something off about him. He doesn't ask for guidance. He doesn't barter for knowledge. He doesn't even pretend to care about becoming Elden Lord. Their talk of destiny slides off him like rain off oil. Trevor has lived too long knowing that titles don't fix what's broken underneath. If anything, they just make the fall louder. Violence escalates, but Trevor doesn't rise to meet it with heroism. He adapts, brutally, improvisationally. Every encounter becomes less about survival and more about domination. Not to prove anything, but to end the conversation as fast as possible. There's no rhythm to his fighting, no respect for form or tradition, just raw intent. The lands between, a world built on ancient rules and sacred cycles, struggles to account for someone who refuses to play a role. Death stops feeling like a consequence and starts feeling like an inconvenience. Each return strips away another layer of hesitation, another flicker of doubt. Trevor becomes quieter, sharper. The jokes fade. What replaces them isn't enlightenment. It's clarity. This world runs on suffering disguised as order, and it expects participants, not critics. Trevor has never been good at participating. By the time night falls and spectral light crawls across the ruins, something fundamental has shifted. Grace still follows him, reluctantly. Like a leash it no longer knows how to tighten. The lands between haven't accepted him, but they haven't rejected him either. He exists in the gap between intention and outcome, a presence the world cannot justify, yet cannot erase. And that's when it becomes clear. Trevor Philips is not here to be shaped by the lands between. He's here to expose them, to walk their sacred ground without reverence, to survive their trials without belief, and to prove that some tarnished were never meant to rise, yet refuse to fall. By the time dawn breaks across the fractured hills, the lands between feel less like a destination and more like a confrontation that refuses to end. Trevor stands at the edge of a ruined overlook, watching mist curl through valleys carved by centuries of war and worship. Somewhere below, something massive stirs, drawn not by fate, but by disruption. Trevor doesn't move to meet it. He lights an imaginary cigarette out of habit, exhales nothing, and lets the silence sit. This world thrives on anticipation. He denies it that pleasure. There is a moment, brief, almost imperceptible, where the lands between seem to hesitate, as if the rules themselves are checking for exceptions. Trevor is one. He carries no reverence for grace, no hunger for restoration, no illusion that power will redeem him. He's not seeking to mend the shattering because he understands instinctively that some things don't break by accident. They break because they deserve to. As he descends, the path narrows and the enemies change. These are not mindless creatures or forgotten soldiers. These are guardians, watchers placed to ensure the world's story moves in one direction only. Trevor's presence disrupts that narrative. He doesn't challenge them with declarations or righteous fury. He meets them with exhaustion sharpened into violence. Each victory feels less like progress and more like erosion, the slow wearing down of a system that assumed obedience was universal. The Erd tree's light stretches further now, bleeding into places it shouldn't reach. It clings to Trevor's shadow, trying to claim him, to mark him as part of the cycle. But every step he takes strips that light of meaning. Grace can follow him. It cannot define him. And that distinction matters more than any crown ever could. By the end of this first passage through the lands between, something irreversible has taken root. Not hope, not destiny. Defiance without theatrics. Trevor doesn't declare war on the gods. He simply refuses to acknowledge their authority. And, in a world sustained by belief, that refusal is corrosive. This is not the beginning of a hero's journey. It's the emergence of a variable the world failed to predict, a tarnished who does not seek to become whole, a man who does not want the throne, the order, or the absolution offered at the end of the road. Trevor Philips walks forward anyway, not guided by grace, not driven by prophecy, but propelled by the same relentless truth that has carried him through every broken place he's ever survived. Some worlds reject monsters. The lands between let one walk freely. The deeper Trevor pushes into the lands between, the less hostile the madness feels. It's not because the dangers ease, but because the shape of them starts to look familiar. Screams echo from cliff sides, where figures wander without direction, laugh in one moment and sob in the next. Eyes glow with the wrong kind of devotion. Bodies move as if their minds lag a few seconds behind. This is supposed to be horrifying. For Trevor, it's unsettling in a quieter way. He's seen this before. Not here, not like this, but close enough to know the rhythm. The influence of frenzy creeps into the air long before it announces itself. The sky takes on a sickly tension, like it's being held together by a thought that won't stop spiraling. Trevor feels it pressing at the edges of his mind, probing, searching for cracks. It doesn't find resistance. It finds recognition. The whispers don't shock him. They don't promise him anything new. They echo things he's already lived with for years. Rage, distrust, the certainty that the world is lying and always has been. Creatures touched by madness react differently to him. They don't rush immediately. Some hesitate, others draw closer, tilting their heads as if trying to understand why this man isn't recoiling. Trevor meets their gaze without flinching. There's no pity there, no kinship either. Just a shared understanding that sanity, in a place like this, is a fragile agreement that's already been broken. When violence erupts, it's fast and ugly, but it isn't fueled by panic. It's procedural, necessary. NPCs who still cling to fragments of themselves respond with visible discomfort. Their dialogue stutters. Their warnings sound rehearsed, like they're repeating things they were told to say long ago. They speak of corruption, of losing oneself, of the danger of gazing too long into forbidden truths. Trevor listens, nods occasionally, then walks away without comment. He's not tempted by madness as a concept. He's insulted by the implication that it's something to fear. To him, it's just honesty stripped of manners. As he presses further, the world grows louder. Not in sound, but in intent. Towers etched with symbols meant to focus chaos loom against the horizon. Burned-out eyes watch from places that should be empty. The lands between are no longer testing Trevor's strength. They're testing his limits. How much disorder can he endure before he breaks into something useful? The answer, slowly and uncomfortably, is more than they expected. There's a moment, brief but significant, when Trevor realizes the madness isn't trying to consume him. It's trying to recruit him. That realization settles in like a bad joke that refuses to land. The frenzied influence doesn't bark orders or demand surrender. It watches. It waits. It studies Trevor the way a mirror studies a face it recognizes but doesn't fully trust. The yellowed glow that bleeds into certain corners of the world feels less like an invasion and more like an invitation that assumes he'll understand the terms without explanation. When Trevor reaches places steeped in frenzy, the air itself feels unstable, as if thought has weight here. Torches burn with an erratic pulse. Walls seem to lean inward. The afflicted stagger and chant, their words half-formed, stripped of coherence. Trevor doesn't cover his ears. He doesn't rush through. He moves at the same pace he always does when chaos starts making sense. Slow, deliberate, observant. He knows better than to confuse noise with danger. The enemies touched by madness fight without strategy, but not without purpose. Their attacks are wild yet committed. Trevor recognizes that kind of focus. It's the clarity that comes when everything else has already fallen apart. He cuts through them efficiently, but there's no triumph in it. Each encounter feels like thinning out an echo rather than defeating an opponent. These aren't adversaries, they're symptoms. At the edges of these zones, survivors cling to scraps of identity, desperately warning him away. They speak of losing control, of becoming something unrecognizable. Trevor pauses long enough to look at them properly. Their fear isn't of madness. It's of honesty, of seeing the world without the protective layer of meaning they've been wrapping around it. He doesn't reassure them. He can't. Reassurance requires belief in a stable outcome, and he's learned better. As the frenzied flame's presence intensifies, Trevor's own behavior shifts in subtle ways. Not toward instability, but toward alignment. His movements grow more economical, his choices less reactive. The chaos around him sharpens his instincts instead of dulling them. The lands between are built on contradictions. Order enforced through suffering, divinity sustained by decay. Trevor doesn't struggle against those contradictions. He understands them. That's what makes him dangerous. There's an unspoken question hanging in the air wherever he goes now. Not whether he will succumb, but why he hasn't already. The frenzied influence circles him, pressing closer, testing emotional fault lines it expects to find. Anger, guilt, isolation. It finds them all. What it doesn't find is denial. Trevor has never lied to himself about what he is. By the time he leaves the deepest pockets of frenzy behind, something has shifted. Not within him, but around him. The madness no longer announces itself when he enters an area. It reacts, as if recognizing one of its own. Not in origin, but in outlook. That reaction unsettles the balance of the lands between in ways no blade ever could. Madness was meant to be a curse here, a consequence for those who gaze too long into forbidden truths. But Trevor doesn't gaze. He lives there. The distinction matters. As he passes through territory scarred by frenzy, the usual escalation never comes. No sudden collapse of thought, no screaming revelation. The chaos seems to lower its voice around him, like it's realized shouting won't work. There are places where the frenzied flame should overwhelm him completely, where other Tarnished fall to their knees, clutching their heads as reality fractures. Trevor feels the pressure, sure, but it's familiar pressure. The kind that used to sit on his chest during sleepless nights. The kind that turns silence into something loud and accusatory. He doesn't resist it. He doesn't embrace it either. He lets it exist, and in doing so, it loses its leverage. The world notices. Subtle at first. Enemies hesitate longer than they should. Paths that once seemed deliberately obstructed feel almost permissive now, as if the land itself is unsure whether to challenge him or step aside. Trevor doesn't comment on it. He never needed validation. He keeps moving, driven not by ambition, but by a quiet need to see how far this recognition goes. What becomes clear is that madness in the lands between isn't random, it's curated, directed, weaponized by forces that pretend it's a natural consequence rather than a tool of control. Trevor sees through that immediately. He spent his entire life being labeled unstable by people who benefited from pretending he was the problem. The frenzied flame isn't liberation, it's another script, another way to funnel rage into something manageable. That realization hardens something in him. He stops reacting to madness as an external threat and starts treating it like terrain, something to navigate, not conquer, something that reveals truths about the world's structure if you pay attention. The lands between are held together by belief, and belief fractures under scrutiny. Trevor doesn't scrutinize out of curiosity. He does it because ignoring cracks has never ended well for him. By now, NPCs don't just fear him, they avoid him. Conversations cut short, warnings trail off mid-sentence. It's as if they sense that speaking too freely around him might unravel something they're desperately holding together. Trevor doesn't chase them down. He understands avoidance. He's mastered it. As he leaves the influence of frenzy once more, the conclusion is unavoidable. Madness didn't claim Trevor Philips because it couldn't. It didn't dominate him because there was nothing left to destabilize. In a world where insanity is a weapon and sanity is a performance, Trevor stands as something far more unsettling. Someone who isn't pretending anymore. That lack of pretense is what truly disturbs the lands between. Madness was supposed to be an endpoint, a place where stories collapse into incoherent noise. Trevor turns it into a passage. He doesn't carry frenzy with him like a banner, nor does he cleanse it from his wake. He leaves it exposed, stripped of mystique, stripped of authority. And in doing so, he robs it of its power. The frenzied flame never offers him comfort. It offers absolution. The promise that nothing matters, so nothing hurts. Trevor sees the trap immediately. He's lived inside that lie before. It doesn't free you. It hollows you out until there's nothing left to lose and nothing left to fight for. The flame senses his refusal and recoils, not in anger, but in something closer to confusion. It has no language for someone who understands despair and still refuses surrender. As Trevor moves on, the echoes of madness don't follow the way they should. They fade behind him, unsettled, like a storm that lost its center. The world resumes its oppressive quiet, but something fundamental has shifted. The lands between no longer treat him as a problem to be corrected or a threat to be erased. They treat him as an anomaly to be observed, a variable that disrupts outcomes simply by existing. There's a moment of clarity that comes without ceremony. Trevor realizes the truth most Tarnished never do. This world doesn't fear madness. It depends on it. Frenzy, rot, decay. They're pressure valves, ways to bleed off dissent while preserving the illusion of order. Gods remain gods because the broken are given somewhere else to fall apart. Trevor refuses that arrangement. He doesn't fall apart quietly. He stays intact, and that's far more dangerous. When he encounters enemies driven mad beyond recovery, he ends them quickly. Not out of mercy, out of respect. He knows what it means to be trapped inside your own head with no way out. But for the forces that cultivate that suffering, he offers no such courtesy. He dismantles their rituals. He disrupts their spaces, not with speeches or grand gestures, but with blunt, unglamorous action. By the time segment 2 closes, the pattern is undeniable. Madness didn't break Trevor Philips. It recognized him, not as a disciple, not as a herald, but as proof of a flaw in the system. A man who carries chaos without worshiping it, who understands despair without kneeling to it. In the lands between, that makes him more unsettling than any lord of frenzied flame ever could. Because Trevor doesn't need the world to end. He just needs it to stop lying to itself. By now, the lands between have learned something about Trevor Philips, even if they refuse to name it. He doesn't speak their language of oaths and relics, but he understands the only dialect that never lies here. Violence, not the theatrical kind sung about in legends, but the blunt transactional force that decides who gets to keep moving and who doesn't. Power in this world isn't inherited or granted, it's enforced. Trevor recognizes that immediately. The first time he stands before a true wielder of authority, the difference is obvious. This is no wandering beast or broken soldier. This is a figure armored in symbolism, steeped in centuries of expectation. Their presence warps the space around them, demanding reverence before the fight even begins. Trevor offers none. He studies them the way he studies everything dangerous, by looking for impatience, for ego, for the moment where certainty turns into vulnerability. When the clash comes, it isn't elegant. Trevor doesn't match their rhythm or respect their tempo. He interrupts it. He breaks the flow, forces mistakes, drags the fight into uncomfortable territory. Each blow isn't about dominance, but about denial. Denying the enemy the story they expect to be living. Denying them the clean arc of hero versus villain. In doing so, Trevor strips power down to its rawest form. Whoever can still stand gets to decide what happens next. Word spreads in the quiet way rumors do in dying worlds. Not with announcements, but with absence. Fortresses that fall silent. Paths that no longer need guarding. Lords whose names stop being spoken because no one wants to admit how they ended. Trevor doesn't collect trophies. He leaves no monuments. His violence erases influence instead of replacing it. That's what makes it effective. The lands between were built to reward obedience disguised as courage. Knights rise by serving causes bigger than themselves. Demigods maintain relevance by clinging to narratives of destiny and sacrifice. Trevor refuses both. He doesn't fight for a banner. He fights to conclude conversations. Every victory shortens the list of things this world can demand from him. As his reputation grows, the tone of resistance changes. Enemies stop testing him and start trying to contain him. Ambushes become deliberate. Traps grow crueler. This isn't punishment, it's recognition. The system has identified a threat that cannot be negotiated with. Trevor responds the same way he always has when cornered. He escalates without apology. Violence becomes his introduction and his punctuation. Not because he enjoys it, but because the lands between leave him no other way to be understood. Every encounter becomes a statement. Trevor doesn't announce his intent with words, banners, or speeches. He announces it through action, in the way his presence alone bends outcomes. A single swing of a weapon can topple more than an enemy. It can dismantle authority, rewrite assumptions, and force observers to reconsider who holds power. The lands between have a rhythm, a cadence that all combatants are expected to follow, but Trevor doesn't follow rhythms. He disrupts them. and in that disruption he communicates far more than any speech could. The first time he faces a demigod, he doesn't hesitate. He doesn't bow. He doesn't weigh honor or legacy. The creature towers over him, magnificent and terrifying, a living testament to what centuries of obedience and ritual can create. Most would crumble at the sight. Trevor studies it, noting the gaps in its guard, the arrogance in its posture, the way it assumes inevitability. Then he strikes, brutally, messily, unelegantly, but with precision born of instinct. Every hit communicates the same message. Power exists only in the moment, and that moment belongs to whoever acts without a hesitation. Trevor's violence teaches lessons the world was never prepared to learn. Tarnished who cling to rules, knights who uphold fealty, even gods who manipulate fate, they all witness it, consciously or not. Power is no longer the right to command or the weight of legacy. Power is survival, clarity, and willingness to act without pretense. In a land obsessed with symbolism and destiny, that truth is revolutionary. It doesn't inspire loyalty. It inspires caution, fear, and, in some cases, a grudging respect. Trevor doesn't care which. He has never sought admiration, only results. The more he engages, the more his reputation grows, not through stories, but through absence and consequence. Outposts that once echoed with the drills of preparation fall silent. Ambitious soldiers and minor lords reconsider campaigns before they even begin. Entire regions adapt their strategies merely because one unpredictable presence exists somewhere along their borders. The lands between are a world built on expected behaviors. And Trevor Philips doesn't behave as expected. His presence is a correction, delivered in action, not words. Trevor learns that violence is a language the lands between cannot fully ignore, and that understanding it is a form of fluency more powerful than the most revered incantations or swords. It isn't about destruction for its own sake. It's about communication, influence, and survival. Every strike, every maneuver, every tactical decision becomes part of a broader conversation with the world, a conversation the world cannot control and does not yet fully understand. This is the power of someone who refuses to play by the rules, not chaos for chaos's sake, but clarity through action. Each engagement, each brutal encounter, reinforces a lesson that echoes far beyond the battlefield. Obedience is optional, authority is negotiable, and in a world built on rigid expectations, the one who refuses them becomes more dangerous than any god. Trevor's encounters begin to shift the landscape itself, not through conquest, but through influence. Soldiers who survive his attacks carry the memory of unpredictability, and that memory spreads faster than the blade. Fortresses once thought impregnable adjust their guard patterns, not because someone has studied strategy, but because survival instincts recognize a variable they cannot anticipate. Even the land seems to recoil or yield as he moves through it. Paths that were dangerous become strangely navigable, not as an invitation, but as a tacit acknowledgement that Trevor Philips does not engage with the world on its terms. When he confronts other Tarnished, those clinging to codes of honor or destiny, the effect is immediate. Their careful choreography falters in the presence of someone who doesn't care for choreography. Trevor doesn't lecture them or belittle their choices. He simply demonstrates a different truth, that power is action, not intention. The lesson is brutal in its simplicity. Some of them grasp it and adjust. Some resist and break. Few endure unscathed. Trevor's encounters with the world's more monstrous threats underscore this philosophy. Colossal beings, twisted by divine design, expect fear, reverence, or at least hesitation. Trevor offers none. He meets their overwhelming presence with the same unflinching pragmatism that has carried him through countless violent encounters elsewhere. Every strike, every maneuver communicates clarity. The moment belongs to whoever acts decisively. In a realm where intimidation and spectacle are language, his blunt approach rewrites the dialect entirely. Even minor acts of violence ripple outward. A skirmish with a group of marauding knights does not just end with their defeat. Their survivors carry fear and uncertainty back to command posts, towns, and other factions. Rumors form, but not stories of heroism or legend. These are tales of unpredictability, of an agent who defies patterns and conventions, and that uncertainty begins to erode the confidence of even the most steadfast forces. Trevor begins to understand in his own way that this is not merely combat. It is influence by action. Where other Tarnished rely on prophecy, relics, or alliances, Trevor relies solely on execution. Each strike, each decisive move, each unplanned response to a threat serves a dual purpose: survival and assertion of presence. Violence becomes his vocabulary, action his syntax, and the world is forced to read and respond, whether it likes it or not. He encounters a warlord ensconced in a fortress, surrounded by layers of ceremonial defense, and the lesson becomes painfully clear. Strength alone doesn't guarantee authority. Ritual doesn't guarantee compliance. Legacy doesn't guarantee obedience. The world expects a story, and Trevor doesn't tell stories. He interrupts them. By the time the fortress falls, the soldiers' disbelief outweighs their injuries. They do not know what to call him, but they cannot deny the message he has delivered. Power is spoken in the only language the lands between cannot ignore. By the end of this passage, a subtle but undeniable transformation begins to take hold. Trevor isn't just surviving through violence. He is translating it into influence. The world reacts differently to him than it does to any other Tarnished, not with hostility, but with wary recalibration. Forces that once assumed predictability now hesitate. Leaders who relied on obedience now calculate contingency. Chaos and structure exist in tension, but Trevor's presence tilts the balance. The lesson is clear. In a universe built on ritual and reverence, action without respect for either is the most potent form of authority. Trevor doesn't seek recognition for these effects. He doesn't care about admiration, legend, or rank. His violence is never performative. It communicates necessity, clarity, and the inescapable truth that no system can control a man who refuses to participate in its narrative. In a world of rigid expectations, that makes him more dangerous than any demigod, more destabilizing than any curse. The lands between may reward destiny, ritual, or lineage, but Trevor speaks in a language they cannot ignore: immediate, uncompromising, and absolute power delivered without ceremony. Trevor's path through the lands between becomes a study in raw consequence. Each action, each violent engagement is a declaration, an assertion of his refusal to be shaped by the world's rules. Other Tarnished fight for honor, for relics, for prophecy. Trevor fights because the world insists on narratives he refuses to participate in. His victories are not trophies, they are statements. Every fortress taken, every beast felled, every encounter survived without reverence communicates the truth the land cannot unsee. Power belongs to those who act, not those who claim it. Even the demigods feel the change. When he confronts them, the ritualized choreography of their combat collapses under his unpredictability. They expect fear, hesitation, a hesitant bow or plea for mercy. They expect structure because that is the foundation of their influence. Trevor offers none. He moves according to instinct, exploiting openings that exist only because the world assumes conformity. His violence is precise not because it is elegant, but because it is necessary. Every swing, every dodge, every decision is a word in a language the lands between is just beginning to understand. The territories themselves react. Soldiers who have survived his attacks hesitate before taking action. Watchtowers adjust their patrols, and minor lords reconsider strategies they had assumed unchallengeable. Not a single plan survives intact once Trevor enters its perimeter, not because he seeks to disrupt, but because he acts without expectation. He communicates authority by doing, by moving through chaos and leaving consequence in his wake. He doesn't need to be remembered. The world remembers for him. Trevor's approach to violence also reshapes the psychology of the world. Where fear once kept subjects obedient, uncertainty now takes root. Creatures and humans alike become cautious, hesitant, constantly recalculating in response to an agent who refuses to be predictable. That hesitation, subtle but pervasive, begins to destabilize control itself. Fiefdoms that relied on ritual and reputation as shields find themselves questioning their security. And for the first time, the lands between are forced to confront a force they cannot categorize. Encounters with the world's more monstrous threats reinforce the same lesson. Colossal, divine, and seemingly immovable beings no longer intimidate him. Their size, their history, their imposed authority, all of it is irrelevant. Trevor engages on his terms, turning their overwhelming power into moments of vulnerability simply by refusing to recognize supremacy as a concept. He becomes a storm the world cannot read or predict, a variable whose only law is survival expressed through decisive action. Even minor skirmishes ripple outward into profound consequences. Marauders, brigands, and corrupt knights who survive encounters with him spread word of his unpredictability. There are no tales of honor or heroism, only cautionary murmurs about a man who does not fight like anyone else and who cannot be intimidated or reasoned with. Rumors become fear. Fear becomes hesitation, and hesitation becomes an advantage Trevor never seeks but consistently commands. The lesson he imparts is stark. The lands between rely on ritual, prophecy, and belief to maintain order, but these tools falter against someone who does not obey them. Trevor doesn't subvert the world through ideology or spectacle. He subverts it through the simplest of truths. Action always outweighs expectation. Every battle is a sentence, every victory a paragraph, and the narrative the world thinks it controls begins to fracture simply because he refuses to follow it. By the end of this segment, Trevor Philips has established himself as a force the lands between cannot contain, predict, or fully understand. Violence has become his language of power, unmediated by honor, prophecy, or ritual. It is clear that he is not merely surviving. He is teaching the world to respond to a truth it has long ignored. Authority is meaningless without execution, and chaos wields more influence than obedience when wielded by someone who refuses to play the role the world expects. Trevor does not claim dominion. He does not seek adoration. He does not crave legacy. He simply exists, acts, and forces consequence, and in doing so he reshapes the very framework of power in the lands between. Those who thought themselves untouchable learn, with each encounter, that in a world built on rigid expectations and sacred cycles, the one who refuses to respect either becomes the most formidable force of all. Trevor Philips does not need the world to recognize him. The world recognizes itself in him, and it does not like what it sees. The deeper Trevor moves into the lands between, the more the world stops being an obstacle and starts being a reflection. The mountains, the ruins, the scarred forests, each whispers fragments of a story he doesn't want to hear, but cannot ignore. Trevor has always thrived on chaos outside himself, on violence and survival as absolutes, but the quiet moments, the spaces where the world seems to pause and stare, begin to press into him. The lands between are filled with memories not his own, but their echoes resonate, triggering a fracture he cannot simply attack away. For the first time, survival feels like more than swinging a weapon or outpacing danger. It is about endurance of the mind, and Trevor is beginning to notice cracks he didn't know existed. Sights of grace become strangely unnerving. They glow with the promise of restoration, of rest, of something resembling peace, but Trevor approaches them without expectation. He sits, observes, waits, not for healing, but to understand what it means to feel calm in a world that is anything but. The light does not soothe him. Instead, it reflects back at him his own reflection, unshaped by fantasy, unvarnished by morality. Every time he rises, it is with a weight he didn't carry when he first arrived. The world is not breaking him in the traditional sense. It is presenting him with a mirror, one that cannot be ignored. As he passes through ruins and remnants of civilizations, Trevor notices the lingering despair embedded in every stone and carving. The traces of devotion turn to rot, of empires that thought themselves eternal, reach out in subtle ways. It is not supernatural. It is history etched into the land. And Trevor, for all his cynicism and resistance, feels it. He has never been a man who contemplates meaning, who pauses to internalize consequence, but the lands between force it. Even the creatures and the deformed beings he faces now seem to carry stories of their own suffering. Some stare at him with familiarity, as though they recognize a kindred instinct to endure without hope. Others recoil, a subtle acknowledgement that he is not like the others, that he has walked through chaos without surrender, but something inside him is beginning to resonate with what he cannot fix. Trevor begins to experience moments of eerie stillness. On cliffs overlooking valleys blackened by war, he hears nothing, sees nothing, yet feels everything pressing inward. These pauses are not safe. They are invitations to confront the fractures within. The constant adrenaline that has defined him is replaced by a slow tension that creeps along his nerves. The mind, not the body, is the battlefield here. Memories of his past, violence, betrayal, survival, begin to merge with the weight of the world he navigates. For someone like Trevor, these are unfamiliar fronts. He knows how to respond to immediate threats. He knows how to dominate and disrupt. But how does one fight the slow, insidious erosion of certainty when there is no clear enemy, no immediate opponent, only the reflection of everything he has ever been and everything the world has made him confront? NPCs he encounters offer warnings, some overt, some almost imperceptible. They speak of the danger of lingering too long in the quiet places, of letting grief and isolation twist perception, of losing oneself in the endless cycle of despair. Trevor hears them, acknowledges them with a nod or a grunt, but does not speak. Not because he disagrees, but because he realizes their words are inadequate. He cannot unlearn the world he carries within him, nor can he ignore the world pressing its weight onto him. The experience is cumulative, subtle, relentless. Every hill climbed, every ruin passed, every whispered fragment of sorrow encountered presses him toward an internal confrontation that cannot be solved by the usual means of aggression. The shattering within begins not with a sudden event, but with accumulation. Trevor, accustomed to external chaos, realizes that there is chaos internalized, a slow corrosion of certainty and self. In quiet moments he feels it, hesitation where once there was instinct, doubt where once there was certainty, a strange vulnerability where there was only defiance. The lands between do not heal or instruct. They expose, they demand recognition of what has been carried too long, and Trevor cannot escape it through movement or violence. Even the landscape seems to echo his internal state. Rivers run dark and sluggish where he expects clarity. Forests twist unnaturally, branches clawing at the sky in ways that feel deliberate. The ruins of cities are empty yet alive, full of voices he cannot place but can feel pressing at him. Trevor's customary humor, the sardonic remarks and cynical observations falter here. There is no appropriate response for a mind confronting itself within a world that refuses comforting illusions. The first true realization hits him when he stands alone in a wide valley at night, watching the stars cut through darkness in patterns that feel arbitrary and cruel. For the first time since arriving, he feels the vulnerability of being truly isolated, not in the sense of physical danger, which he has mastered, but in the sense of facing the enormity of the world and the enormity of himself simultaneously. The lands between are vast, unyielding, and morally indifferent, and in that reflection Trevor sees a part of himself unshielded by humor, distraction, or violence. This internal pressure begins to affect his decisions. Movement becomes more deliberate, strikes more calculated, and moments of pause are more frequent. Trevor is learning, slowly, that survival in the lands between is not solely a matter of strength or speed. It is also a matter of endurance of the psyche, of acknowledging the fracture points without letting them consume him entirely. It is a lesson he has never been forced to learn elsewhere, and it leaves an unfamiliar weight on his shoulders, one that does not dissipate in the glow of a blade or the collapse of an enemy. The shattering within is not immediate, nor is it dramatic. It creeps into consciousness like a slow erosion, a subtle rearrangement of priorities and perception. Trevor begins to notice patterns in his own reaction, flashes of anger that feel disproportionate, moments of reflection he cannot explain, impulses that are no longer purely reactionary. The world has introduced variables he cannot dominate through sheer force. The battle is no longer against enemies, nor even against the chaos of the land. It is against himself, the accumulated damage of his past, and the reflection of a universe that offers no easy victories or false assurances. This is where the lands between prove to be more formidable than any demigod or colossal creature. They do not attack the body. They do not demand submission. They attack understanding, perception, and self-conception. Trevor has survived everything else by being unpredictable, brutal, and relentless. But here, in the quiet, the stillness, the moments between battles, he faces a challenge that cannot be cut, shot, or destroyed. It is the recognition of all that he carries inside, magnified by a world that mirrors his own instability back at him. Trevor stands at the edge of a cliff, the wind cutting through the valley below, and he feels the full weight of it for the first time. Not fear, not despair, recognition. Recognition that his usual methods of control, violence, distraction, dominance, are insufficient here. The lands between demand more than survival. They demand confrontation with the fracture within, and Trevor Philips has never faced an adversary so intimately familiar yet so alien. The realization is sobering, unsettling, but not paralyzing. He adapts as he always does, but this adaptation is quieter, slower, and more reflective. The shattering within is beginning, and Trevor can feel it shaping him even as he moves forward, forcing a reckoning with a self that cannot be rewritten by brute force alone. This is only the beginning. The cracks are forming, the pressure is mounting, and Trevor Philips is learning that endurance here is as much about understanding the mind as it is about mastering the world around him. The shattering within is not a moment of weakness. It is the first step in a confrontation that will redefine what it means to survive in a universe that respects neither morality nor intent. Trevor walks forward, aware, unyielding, and increasingly conscious of the internal storm he can no longer ignore. The shattering within begins to affect how Trevor perceives the world around him. The lands between no longer exist simply as a place to move through and dominate. Every ruined cathedral, every scorched battlefield, every silent, overgrown city feels like it's pressing back, reflecting the tension he carries inside. Where once he saw opportunity and danger in simple terms, now he sees layers of consequence, echoes of despair, and the faint traces of intentions that no longer matter. Survival alone is no longer sufficient. To continue moving forward, Trevor must navigate not only the physical threats of this world, but the subtle, psychological weight that the lands between have begun to impose on him. Encounters with the afflicted and the hollowed take on new meaning. These beings, broken by curse, rot, or despair, are more than obstacles or enemies. They are mirrors of what happens when the mind fractures and no one intervenes. Their screams and gibbering mutterings strike Trevor not with fear, but with recognition. He doesn't see monsters here. He sees the path that could have been his, the reflection of chaos and instability in a world that refuses to soften its edges. Even his attacks carry a different weight now. When he strikes, it is no longer only survival or assertion of power. It is acknowledgement of the fragility that he glimpses in himself. The quiet moments of reflection grow longer and more pronounced. At the edge of a frozen lake or within the shadowed halls of an abandoned fortress, Trevor finds himself pausing more than usual, observing the interplay of light and decay, listening to the silence that is not empty, but charged with history and memory. His mind, conditioned for immediate reaction, begins to slow in these spaces, processing not just the environment, but the cumulative impact of every decision, every death, and every act of violence he has committed. For the first time, he feels that his own inner chaos cannot simply be externalized. It must be confronted. Memories of his past life in Los Santos, of betrayals, of survival by any means necessary, surface unbidden. The juxtaposition of his violent instinct against the introspective weight of the lands between creates a tension unlike anything he has experienced. Normally, chaos is external, something to be conquered or endured. Here, chaos becomes internalized, and Trevor is forced to reckon with the unvarnished reality of his own fractured mind. He begins to understand that his instincts, honed over decades, will only carry him so far. The mind can shatter in ways the body cannot survive, and the lands between are experts at exploiting this truth. Even the sites of grace, once merely convenient points of rest, take on a more profound significance. They are no longer just mechanisms for recovery. They are points of reflection, places where the world's weight and his own past converge. Sitting in their glow, Trevor confronts the quiet truth that he has never truly rested, never truly confronted the consequences of his actions or the instability that defines him. Each awakening from death in this world brings not just the restoration of life, but the relentless return of awareness, of the subtle fracture that grows stronger with each experience. The shattering within is cumulative, a slow erosion of certainty and simplicity. Decisions that once came instinctively now carry unseen consequences, ripples that affect both his perception and his actions. Trevor begins to notice hesitation in himself, subtle, almost imperceptible, where there was none before. He feels the burden of understanding that strength alone will not solve the challenge this world presents. The lands between demand more than brute force. They demand acknowledgement of the mind's fragility, and Trevor is learning, slowly and painfully, that this is a battlefield he cannot ignore. The isolation of the lands between amplifies this effect. Trevor's usual companions, the familiar chaos of others, the distractions that buffered him from reflection, are absent. Every interaction is measured, deliberate, and rare. Loneliness is no longer a background noise, but a presence, palpable and inescapable. It presses against him, forcing him to confront what he has always avoided, the possibility that his own internal fracture may not be repairable, only manageable. He moves forward, not because the path is safe, but because stopping is impossible, and each step is a negotiation with the mind that has never been still before. Trevor Philips is discovering that the shattering within is not a moment of weakness, nor is it defeat. It is a necessary confrontation, a crucible that tests not his skill or his strength, but his capacity to endure the weight of awareness. The lands between have become more than a physical journey. They have become an internal journey, one in which reflection, recognition, and reckoning are as dangerous as any blade. Trevor walks forward, aware that each step carries the pressure of not just survival, but self-confrontation, and that the ultimate test may not be against the world, but against the fractures he carries within. The fractures he carries within grow more pronounced with every passing step, subtle yet undeniable. Trevor has always been a storm, a chaotic force acting without hesitation, unrestrained by morality or convention. In Los Santos, the rules were flexible, and survival required little more than audacity and aggression. Here, in the lands between, audacity alone is insufficient. The world presses back, not through brute force, but through reflection. Each ruin he passes, each hollowed figure he encounters, seems to whisper the weight of time, despair, and inevitability. And those whispers penetrate deeper than any blade ever could. The fractures he carries, which he had long ignored, can no longer be pushed aside by violence or distraction. He begins to notice it in the quiet moments between battles, when the wind stirs the branches of a twisted forest, or when he stands on a cliff overlooking a valley scarred by centuries of war. Trevor feels the weight of the world pressing inward. It is not fear, not exactly, but a creeping awareness of vulnerability. The adrenaline and fury that have defined him are tempered by a new sensation, introspection forced by circumstance. Here, in a universe that cannot be dominated by reputation or aggression alone, the mind itself becomes a battlefield. Every decision, every movement, every instinctive reaction is layered with consequence that cannot be shrugged off. Even his encounters with other Tarnished are different. The warriors who follow prophecy or honor act as reminders of everything Trevor has evaded in his life. Accountability, loyalty, morality. He does not join them. He does not align with them. Yet their presence, their rituals, their adherence to cycles of cause and effect resonates within him in ways he cannot entirely ignore. He senses their intentions, their hope, and their despair, and it forces him to confront aspects of himself he has long avoided. The self he has hardened behind humor, cynicism, and brute force. The realization is uncomfortable but undeniable. The chaos outside has mirrored a chaos inside, and now the shattering within is demanding acknowledgement. Trevor notices patterns in the world that he had previously ignored. Ruins do not merely represent decay. They are chronicles of ambition, failure, and despair. The once proud towers and halls, crumbling and overgrown, speak to the inevitability of collapse and the futility of control. Creatures, once just targets or obstacles, now feel like carriers of memory and suffering. Hollowed beings do not simply attack. They exist as reminders of fractured purpose and unhealed wounds. Every swing of his weapon carries more weight than before because it interacts not only with the physical threat, but with the resonance of the past and the reflection of his own instability. The pressure begins to manifest in subtle ways. Trevor hesitates where he never would have hesitated before, weighing paths and outcomes with a cautious deliberation that feels foreign. Moments of reflection grow longer, especially in spaces that are still and quiet. He senses the world waiting, testing him, and he realizes that every pause carries risk. Here, even stillness is dangerous, for it leaves the mind exposed to the shattering within. And exposed it is, as he begins to recognize traces of his past, betrayals, losses, and violent impulses surfacing alongside the echoes of this universe's own fractured history. The combination is dizzying, destabilizing, and utterly unrelenting. He cannot externalize this chaos with violence alone. Combat, so long his tool for domination and release, is no longer enough to fully address the internal fracture. The lands between force him to confront the slow, insidious erosion of certainty and instinct, the way hesitation and awareness creep into his decisions. Each choice now carries an internal cost that is just as real as any physical danger. The fractures he carries begin to feel like living entities themselves, pressing, whispering, challenging, always demanding recognition. Trevor realizes that the mind can break in ways the body cannot. Even sites of grace, once mere checkpoints for recovery, become moments of confrontation. They glow with an almost oppressive serenity, inviting reflection that he cannot refuse. Sitting in their light, Trevor faces a truth he has long evaded. He has never truly rested, never confronted the weight of his own self fully. And now, in a world that demands acknowledgement of internal and external chaos simultaneously, he has no choice. He can act, fight, and survive endlessly, but the shattering within requires that he also understand, endure, and integrate the fracture rather than ignore it. The result is a transformation in how he navigates the world. Trevor moves with more deliberation, his instincts tempered by awareness, his reactions sharpened by recognition of consequence. The familiar humor and sarcasm that once shielded him falter. The mind that was once a weapon now becomes a mirror reflecting the weight of every choice and every unseen cost. Survival, he learns, is no longer merely about aggression. It is about endurance, resilience, and the capacity to confront internal chaos while facing a world that refuses to simplify itself. By the time he emerges from one of the larger ruins into an open field under the eerie glow of the Erd Tree's light, the shattering within has begun to reshape him fundamentally. Trevor Philips, the man who survived everything Los Santos could throw at him, begins to understand that the greatest challenge is no longer external. It is the fracture itself, the internal reckoning, and the relentless pressure of a universe that mirrors and amplifies every instability he has ever carried. And yet, there is purpose in this. The shattering within is not a weakness, it is preparation. It is the crucible through which he must pass to face the challenges ahead, the confrontations no one else could survive, and the endings the lands between were never meant to witness. The shattering within grows sharper as Trevor presses further into the heart of the lands between. The ruins he passes are more than decayed structures. They are monuments to ambition and failure, and the echoes of their past seep into him in ways he cannot ignore. Each collapsed cathedral, each broken hall, each forest overrun with rot or fire seems to hum with memory, carrying whispers of despair and hubris. Trevor, who has always confronted danger with blunt force, now finds the silence itself heavy with consequence. It is not external threat that weighs on him. It is the realization that the fractures of the world mirror the fractures within himself. He begins to recognize patterns that eluded him before. Places that once seemed random now pulse with purpose. Corridors that wind in impossible ways. Creatures that linger at thresholds not out of malice, but as sentinels of memory. They are reminders that the lands between do not merely test survival. They test the capacity to withstand reflection, to endure the revelation of one's own instability in a place that magnifies it. Trevor has never been a man to confront himself in such a structured, relentless way. Violence has always been a method, a release, a way to assert control over the chaos outside. Here, control is impossible. The chaos is not just outside, it is inside. Each encounter, whether with a creature, a hollowed soldier, or a fragment of a fallen civilization, challenges more than his physical prowess. Trevor notices subtle shifts in perception, a rising tension in his chest when he observes decay that feels deliberate, when whispers brush against his ears that carry meanings he cannot immediately place. The weight of every step, every observation, every act of violence begins to coalesce into an understanding. Survival in the lands between requires not just strength of arms, but strength of mind. And Trevor realizes that this is a strength he has long neglected. Sites of grace, once simple markers of reprieve, now demand his attention in unexpected ways. Sitting at one, he senses the accumulation of lives that have rested, fallen, and risen again in their glow. He feels their despair, their fleeting hope, and the relentless repetition of their struggles. It is not comforting. It is humbling. Trevor does not pray. He does not seek guidance. He observes. He absorbs. And in this absorption, the shattering within presses more insistently, a weight that he cannot attack, cannot evade, and cannot negotiate. It is relentless, patient, and impossibly intimate. The internal fractures begin to manifest in subtle behaviors. Trevor finds himself pausing more often at crossroads, lingering longer in areas where the world seems particularly broken, considering paths and consequences that previously would have been ignored in favor of immediacy. His usual sarcasm and dismissive humor, shields he has relied on for decades, falter. In their place grows a quiet vigilance, a recognition that every decision carries a latent cost, not only in lives affected, but in the echoes it leaves within his own mind. He begins to see the interplay between external chaos and internal instability, realizing that understanding one requires acknowledging the other. Even as he continues to exert his brand of violence when necessary, it is tempered by awareness. Trevor acts with efficiency, but also with consideration of consequence, not for morality's sake, but as a measure of personal endurance. The shattering within does not diminish his capacity to act. It sharpens it, forcing him to confront the implications of every choice. Combat becomes not only a statement to the world, but a dialogue with himself, a way of testing his resilience against the subtle erosion of certainty and control. Each battle, each victory, each death he witnesses or survives reinforces the realization that the mind is as vulnerable as the body and far less forgiving. Isolation amplifies the effect. Trevor moves through regions where there is no sign of life, where ruins are empty and forests silent except for the whispers of wind. The absence of distraction forces him inward. Thoughts he would usually suppress, the failures, betrayals, and violent impulses that define him, surface with a clarity that is both disorienting and illuminating. The shattering within is not sudden. It is not dramatic. It is incremental, a slow cracking of the mental armor he has built around himself for survival. And yet, there is a strange purpose in it, a recognition that this confrontation is necessary if he is to endure the challenges that the lands between continue to present. Trevor begins to understand that endurance here is measured not by brute force or aggression, but by the capacity to navigate uncertainty, to confront the weight of one's own reflection, and to act despite the absence of clarity. The world does not forgive hesitation, and neither does he. Each step, each decision, each encounter is a negotiation with the shattering within, a test of whether he can continue forward without being consumed by the same internal chaos that has destroyed so many before him. By the time he emerges from the shadowed ruins into a field scarred by centuries of battle, Trevor recognizes a profound truth. The shattering within is not a weakness to be overcome. It is a crucible, a necessary confrontation with the self that cannot be denied or ignored. It forces clarity, sharpens instinct, and prepares him for challenges that lie ahead, both external and internal. The lands between have revealed that survival is no longer merely about dominance or violence. It is about understanding the fractures within, acknowledging them, and continuing forward with eyes wide open, even when the weight of awareness presses relentlessly against every step. Trevor Philips walks forward, carrying both the external dangers of the lands between and the internal fractures that this world has magnified, aware that every victory and every step is now intertwined with the ongoing shattering within. The confrontation has begun, and there is no turning back. Before the climax of any journey, the lands between assume a rhythm, a narrative that has played out countless times over centuries. Heroes rise, lords fall. Grace guides the worthy, punishes the unprepared, and ensures that the cycle continues with near-perfect predictability. But Trevor Philips is not a hero. He is not guided by prophecy. He is not constrained by expectation. He is a variable the world was never meant to account for, and that becomes evident as he approaches the central heart of the lands between. The path here is littered with the remains of those who followed the rules, who trusted in fate, and who assumed that the narrative of power and consequence would protect them. Trevor walks past their bones, unshaken, unbowed, and unbound by the story the world insists upon telling. The closer he gets to the final confrontation, the more the world itself seems to recognize its own vulnerability. The Erd Tree, magnificent and impossibly radiant, casts light that is no longer pure or certain. Shadows twist unnaturally at its base, as if reality itself hesitates. The forces aligned with destiny prepare, not for a hero, but for someone entirely unaccountable, someone who will not honor the expected laws of conflict or restraint. Trevor observes them, noting every gesture, every imperfection, every assumption of inevitable obedience. He does not fear. Fear is irrelevant. He moves forward with the same reckless clarity that has defined his journey from the first moment he stepped into this universe. Every challenge along the way has sharpened him, not in accordance with the rules of the lands between, but in a way entirely his own. He has learned that violence is language, chaos is recognition, and endurance is negotiation with the self. Now all of those lessons converge as he faces a world poised for perfection, for symmetry, and for order. And he is about to fracture it in ways no one anticipated. There is no fanfare, no ceremonial acknowledgement. The air itself seems to tense, aware that something unprecedented is approaching. Trevor, unconcerned with grandeur, simply steps into the arena the world has prepared, fully conscious that he carries neither destiny nor redemption, only the unyielding force of his own unpredictability. The first encounters in this final domain confirm the impossibility of prediction. Guardians, colossal and imbued with the authority of ages, expect submission, hesitation, or awe. They do not receive it. Trevor moves in ways they cannot anticipate, striking, dodging, and responding with an efficiency that is not calculated by ritual or experience, but by instinct honed in a lifetime of chaos. Every blow he lands, every strategy he disrupts, speaks a language the world is only beginning to understand. Power in the lands between is supposed to be inherited, earned, or bestowed. Trevor rewrites that definition. He claims it through action, through disruption, through the raw assertion of presence. The Erd Tree itself, a symbol of eternal order and divine oversight, becomes a backdrop to his rebellion, not an authority to be revered. Light falls differently across him, shadows stretch in unplanned directions, and the world shudders under the weight of a force it cannot contain. Trevor does not seek to topple it for glory, nor to wield it as a weapon. He exists in defiance of its dominion, demonstrating through sheer existence that the cycle of power and obedience is not immutable. The very air feels charged with the anticipation of broken rules, and the universe seems to pulse with unease, realizing that it is never prepared for a presence like this. Even the Tarnished, who still cling to tradition, are forced to confront the impossibility of his path. Their strategies, rituals, and expectations crumble in his wake. Trevor is not merely defeating them. He is rewriting the rules of engagement in real time. The world has no scripts for him. There are no divine interventions planned to steer him toward a predetermined conclusion. He does not play for honor, for grace, or for restoration. He moves with clarity, with chaos, and with the relentless assertion that he will reach the conclusion on terms entirely his own. The culmination of this journey is not about spectacle. It is not about conquest in the way the lands between understand it. It is about existence outside of expectation, about proving that even a universe structured around prophecy and destiny can be disrupted by a force that refuses narrative. Trevor's actions reverberate beyond the battlefield. Castles crumble, armies hesitate, and even the environment itself responds unpredictably, as if the rules that governed it have been quietly suspended in recognition of a threat it cannot name. He does not pause to savor these effects. Trevor never seeks recognition. He only moves forward, propelled by instinct, circumstance, and an understanding of power that the world cannot anticipate or counter. Every step closer to the ultimate confrontation magnifies the impossibility of what is unfolding. The lands between have seen countless heroes and countless villains, but none who act without deference, without aspiration, without concern for prophecy or reward. Trevor exists as an anomaly, and anomalies, by their very nature, do not fit neatly into cycles. They do not obey narrative arcs or honor codes. They rewrite consequences without thought for ceremony or morality. And as the final challenge approaches, it becomes increasingly clear that the ending Trevor is creating is one the world itself was never prepared to contain. Trevor Philips does not merely enter the arena of destiny. He enters as a living contradiction, a force that has been shaped by chaos but refuses to be defined by it. Every obstacle he overcomes, every opponent he outmaneuvers, and every expectation he refuses to honor compounds into a single, terrifying realization for the lands between. The story the world has always told itself is incomplete. It has no provisions for someone like him. The final moments, though still ahead, already carry the weight of inevitability, not for Trevor, but for the universe itself. It will not end the way it has always ended. The lands between, structured on cycles and obedience, are about to witness an ending they were never designed to survive. Trevor's path toward that ending is not just physical, but philosophical. Every act of defiance, every unorthodox decision, every interruption of established order accumulates into a crescendo of disruption. The world has been patient, enduring, structured around the assumption that all forces will ultimately conform to expectation. Trevor has proven repeatedly that this is not the case. And now, standing at the threshold of what the lands between have always considered the final confrontation, the truth crystallizes. The conclusion of this journey will not be dictated by destiny, prophecy, or divine law. It will be dictated by a force entirely unaccounted for, entirely unpredictable, and entirely unstoppable in its refusal to exist within the rules the world has imposed. Trevor Philips moves forward, fully aware of the scope of the disruption he embodies. He does not pause to reflect on consequences or moral imperatives. He does not seek to earn the world's approval, nor does he attempt to interpret its judgments. He simply acts, and in doing so, he shapes an ending the lands between were never designed to produce. Every strike, every maneuver, every calculated step carries a significance the world cannot comprehend. Trevor does not just survive. He redefines survival, authority, and consequence in a universe that assumed such definitions were fixed. The final confrontation is not merely a battle. It is a reckoning between expectation and chaos, narrative and reality. And Trevor Philips has ensured that chaos will speak louder than any prophecy. The culmination of Trevor's journey reveals the full weight of his presence in the lands between. Forces that once seemed invincible falter in anticipation, not because they have been defeated, but because they cannot predict him. Every demigod, every guardian, every spectral sentinel recognizes that he does not follow rules they were built to enforce. Trevor's unpredictability becomes a weapon as potent as any sword or spell. The lands between, structured around cycles of obedience and ritual, begins to unravel subtly under the pressure of his actions. Castles stand, armies assemble, and divine entities prepare, but none can account for a force that refuses expectation entirely. Even the Erd tree, the colossal symbol of order and continuity, seems unsettled. Its light, normally unwavering and absolute, flickers in ways that feel almost deliberate. Shadows stretch and twist where they should not. The air hums with tension, as if the universe itself senses an anomaly it cannot contain. Trevor does not engage with awe or reverence. He moves with the same unflinching pragmatism that has carried him through every other challenge, understanding that the world's symbols are not rules. They are obstacles, illusions, and tests. To the Erd Tree, he is neither hero nor enemy. He is a question, unanswerable and disquieting. The Tarnished who follow the expected path are stunned by his presence. They had assumed order, predictability, and narrative inevitability were constants, and Trevor demolishes that assumption with every step. His attacks are unrefined by tradition, unbound by ceremony, yet precise in effect. He does not fight for honor, for legacy, or for recognition. Every victory is immediate and final, a statement of existence rather than conquest. Observers, divine and mortal alike, are forced to reckon with a reality they have never been equipped to handle. The conclusion of events in this world is no longer dictated by destiny, prophecy, or divine will. It is dictated by Trevor Philips alone. Trevor's interactions with the world's more powerful forces further underline this. Colossal guardians constructed over centuries to impose authority and inspire awe falter in his presence. He does not hesitate. He does not calculate outcomes according to tradition. He moves with raw instinct, striking openings that were never meant to exist and exploiting weaknesses that no one else would consider. Each confrontation is more than a battle. It is a demonstration that authority, no matter how divinely ordained or ritually reinforced, is meaningless in the face of unpredictability. Trevor teaches through action that power is not inherited, earned, or granted. It is asserted. The consequences of his defiance ripple outward. Soldiers retreat, fortresses collapse, and even the environment seems to respond to his presence. Trees shudder, rivers flow differently, and the land itself shifts, subtly acknowledging an agent it cannot control. Trevor does not seek to command the world. He simply exists within it, and existence alone disrupts the balance. Every moment becomes a challenge to the universe's assumptions, and every decision he makes accelerates the unraveling of the structures that have persisted for centuries. As Trevor approaches the final confrontation, he feels no fear, no hesitation, and no desire for glory. He is not bound by the rules that have shaped countless lives in the lands between. His approach is neither heroic nor villainous. It is an assertion of agency in a world that assumed agency was a fixed commodity reserved for the worthy. The final battle is not simply an encounter. It is a rewriting of expectation, a defiance of inevitability, and a reminder that even in a universe built on prophecy, one unaccountable force can impose its own terms. Trevor's path demonstrates that endings are not always dictated by narrative, fate, or divinity. In the lands between, endings are assumed to follow established patterns. The righteous ascend, the unworthy fall, and the cycle continues. Trevor destroys that assumption. He moves forward with clarity born of chaos, violence as language, and endurance forged in both body and mind. The world braces for the inevitable, but Trevor's inevitability is unlike any the universe has prepared for. He does not merely challenge the final act. He dictates it in a way no prophecy or cycle could have anticipated. In the moments before the climax, the lands between are tense with anticipation. Not a tension born of fear or hope, but of recognition. Recognition that the world has never accounted for someone like Trevor Philips. He carries no legacy, no divine blessing, no moral alignment. He is an uncontainable force, a variable that exists outside expectation, and the world, with all its power and ritual, can do nothing but watch. The ending he is creating is not one the universe intended. It is violent, chaotic, and utterly singular, a reflection of the man himself and the impossibility of containing him within any narrative the lands between were designed to enforce. Trevor steps forward, each movement deliberate and unstoppable. The culmination of his journey is not measured in trophies or accolades. It is measured in the sheer disruption of expectation. in the demonstration that even a universe structured on obedience, prophecy, and divine authority cannot withstand a force that refuses to participate in its rules. The lands between are no longer just a stage. They are an audience to an ending they were never meant to witness, an ending dictated by unpredictability, resolve, and the unrelenting assertion of existence. The final stretch of Trevor's journey is less about confrontation and more about inevitability. The lands between, a world designed to reward compliance and punish deviation, begins to reveal its fragility in the face of someone who refuses to play by its rules. Statues of gods and heroes, monuments to centuries of order, seem to loom less imposing, their presence diminished not by fear, but by irrelevance. Trevor does not bow, does not negotiate, and does not hesitate. Every step, every movement, every decision he makes in this final domain reinforces a reality the universe is not prepared for. Endings are no longer dictated by prophecy, hierarchy, or ritual. They are dictated by action, and in this, Trevor Philips has absolute mastery. As he moves through the hallways of colossal fortresses and across fields scorched by ancient battles, the forces aligned against him realize too late that they have underestimated what it means to face an unbound agent. Soldiers trained in obedience, knights conditioned to serve destiny, even demigods steeped in millennia of authority. They all falter in the presence of someone who refuses the language they speak. Trevor does not need to understand their customs. He does not care for their traditions. Every strike he lands, every obstacle he dismantles, communicates one undeniable fact. Power belongs to those who act, and the lands between, for all its rules and decrees, has never accounted for someone like him. The Erd tree's glow, long a symbol of continuity and divine order, flickers with a subtle unease. It is not alive in the way mortals perceive life, but it is aware. The world feels Trevor's presence as an anomaly, a disruption so profound that even its mechanisms of balance and punishment hesitate. Light refracts unnaturally across shattered halls, shadows twist in impossible angles, and the ground trembles not from his footsteps, but from the knowledge that its rules are being bent, rewritten, and challenged in real time. Trevor does not marvel at this. He observes, adapts, and presses forward, understanding that the world's disquiet is both acknowledgement and warning. Encounter after encounter in this final domain reinforces the same principle. Guardians that should have been unassailable fall to his unorthodox tactics. Each strike, seemingly reckless, exposes vulnerabilities the world has ignored for centuries. Even when facing colossal beasts imbued with divine power, Trevor's instincts allow him to move through chaos with an efficiency born of both experience and raw audacity. He does not pause to consider honor, morality, or consequence. Every act is immediate, decisive, and uncontainable. In doing so, he shatters the expectation that the universe's ultimate forces are untouchable, proving that unpredictability can override even the most meticulously constructed order. The Tarnished who witness his approach begin to realize a profound truth. No system of hierarchy, prophecy, or divine sanction can withstand someone entirely unaccountable. Their strategies falter, their rituals collapse, and the assumptions they have built their lives upon are invalidated in real time. Trevor's path does not merely defy them, it forces them to confront a reality they were never prepared to acknowledge. Authority, they begin to understand, is meaningless when challenged by a mind that refuses compliance, a body that refuses restraint, and a will that refuses the narrative the world insists upon. Trevor's progression toward the final confrontation is marked not by grandiose gestures, but by subtle dismantling. Castles and fortresses are left in disarray, armies hesitate before acting, and the environment itself responds unpredictably to his presence. Rivers shift, forests twist, and ruins seem to lean and shudder as if acknowledging a force it cannot anticipate. Trevor does not control these reactions, nor does he need to. They are the byproduct of his existence, a manifestation of the impossibility he embodies. The universe cannot reconcile his actions with its expectations, and the more it tries, the more it fractures. The culmination of this journey is less a battle and more a revelation. The lands between, built upon cycles of obedience and ritual, are confronted with an entity that cannot be assimilated into its structure. Trevor's unpredictability becomes a defining characteristic, not a flaw. Every action communicates a truth the world cannot accept. Endings are not preordained. Destiny is negotiable. Authority is contingent. Survival is dictated by adaptability and audacity, not prophecy or divine sanction. As Trevor approaches the heart of the Erd Tree, the final guardians await, colossal and imposing, embodiments of millennia of control. They assume inevitability, that the world's script will guide the conclusion. Trevor does not honor their assumptions. He does not hesitate or defer. Every step forward, every calculated movement, every strike he delivers challenges the universe's fundamental design. The world, which has always trusted in order and expectation, trembles under the weight of his presence. Trevor's journey demonstrates that endings are not guaranteed by destiny, ceremony, or hierarchy. They are written by the forces that refuse to follow rules. In the lands between, a world that has never accounted for such an agent, the narrative itself begins to bend, ripple, and unravel. Trevor Philips does not merely participate in the conclusion, he dictates it. It is violent, unorthodox, and entirely uncontainable, a reflection of the man himself and the impossibility of constraining him within any pre-existing framework the universe has prepared. The universe pauses, not in awe, but in recognition. Not a recognition of power, honor, or morality, but of anomaly. Trevor's presence defies understanding. He moves beyond expectation, rewriting consequence in real time, and forcing the world to confront an ending it was never meant to witness. Survival, authority, and fate are all redefined by his actions, and as the final confrontation approaches, it becomes evident the conclusion of this universe, long considered inevitable, will belong entirely to Trevor Philips, the anomaly that no cycle, no prophecy, and no divine law could anticipate. Trevor steps into the very heart of the Erd Tree, the air thick with the weight of expectation and centuries of assumed inevitability. The world is silent, as if holding its breath, and even the light filtering through the colossal branches seems hesitant, refracted by the chaos his presence embodies. He does not pause, does not bow, and does not acknowledge destiny. He exists solely as an agent of disruption, a force the universe cannot predict or contain. Every step resonates with the unmistakable certainty that this ending, unlike any before, is entirely his to define. The lands between were designed for heroes, for demigods, for prophecy, but they were not designed for Trevor Philips, and that fact is about to become their undoing. The final guardians rise to confront him, embodiments of divine authority and millennia of order. They move in rigid patterns, expecting hesitation, reverence, or at least predictability. Trevor meets them with the instincts honed from a lifetime of chaos and violence, striking openings that should not exist, exploiting vulnerabilities that no ritual could account for. Every clash of steel, every arc of destruction is more than combat. It is a statement, a declaration that the universe's rules are no longer binding. Force, expectation, and legacy mean nothing here. Only action matters, and Trevor's actions speak louder than any prophecy or divine edict ever could. As he moves deeper into the Erd Tree's heart, the world itself begins to fracture under the weight of his defiance. Light flickers, shadows stretch unnaturally, and even the environment responds unpredictably. Stone trembles, roots writhe, and rivers shift as if acknowledging that an ending the universe never accounted for is unfolding. Trevor does not seek to wield or dominate this power. He simply exists within it, and in doing so, reshapes everything around him. Structures collapse not by design but by the impossibility he embodies. The lands between, for all its history, ritual, and assumed inevitability, cannot survive the anomaly that is Trevor Philips. The Erd tree, a symbol of divine authority, flickers with uncertainty as if recognizing a presence that cannot be categorized. Trevor does not bow, pray, or plead. He moves forward with unwavering intent, unburdened by morality or expectation, and the universe reacts in kind. Every strike he lands, every guardian he overcomes, every shadow he disrupts is a note in a song of chaos the world was never prepared to hear. The script of history, carefully constructed over eons, unravels in real time, and for the first time, the lands between are forced to confront the reality that outcomes are not determined by legacy, ritual, or divine favor, but by the relentless, unaccountable force of a single, unpredictable agent. Even the Tarnished who cling to tradition watch in stunned disbelief. Strategies crumble, rituals fail, assumptions collapse. They have trained their lives for order, for destiny, for cycles of cause and effect, but Trevor operates entirely outside those parameters. His unpredictability is not a flaw, it is his ultimate weapon. He does not seek fame or fortune. He does not fight for glory. He simply acts, and the universe has no script to contain or explain his existence. Every moment becomes a lesson in chaos, every victory a testament to the power of unbound action, and every step forward a declaration that endings are not owed to prophecy. They are seized by those daring enough to define them themselves. At the climax, the Erd tree itself trembles under the force of a confrontation it was never designed to withstand. Light fractures across the canopy, shadows writhe in unnatural forms, and even the air seems charged with recognition that the final chapter of this universe is being written outside the bounds of expectation. Trevor does not hesitate. He strikes, moves, and asserts himself with a precision born of instinct, audacity, and absolute disregard for precedent. The world watches, powerless, as the anomaly that is Trevor Philips carves an ending the lands between were never meant to have. When the dust settles, the silence is profound. No heralds, no prophecies, no divine forces remain to dictate the conclusion. The universe has been rewritten in real time, not by destiny or design, but by the singular force of a man who refused to follow rules, honor expectations, or acknowledge fate. Trevor Philips has not simply survived, he has shattered the inevitability the world relied upon and defined a new order through sheer will, action, and defiance. The lands between will never be the same. Castles, guardians, and deities alike bear the imprint of a presence that could not be reconciled with their laws. Trevor's journey ends not with triumph in the traditional sense, but with an undeniable statement. Endings that are not owed to the universe. They are claimed by those bold enough to disrupt it. He walks forward, unbowed, unbound, and unforgettable, a testament to the chaos, unpredictability, and raw force of human will. And so, the story closes here. Trevor Philips entered a world that had existed for millennia with its cycles and prophecies, and he left it transformed. Not as a hero, not as a villain, but as a force of nature, a variable the lands between could never predict or contain. His journey is a reminder that even in universes bound by destiny, one unaccountable presence can redefine the rules, challenge the structures, and create an ending no one, not gods, not demigods, not heroes, was ever meant to witness. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the impossible, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next CrossWorld adventure where we continue to explore the worlds you thought you knew in ways you never imagined. Drop a comment below telling us which universe you'd like to see crossed next, because with the right mind in the wrong world, anything is possible.